Are you constantly fatigued, always getting sick, constantly having some sort of niggling injury? Well, what we're talking about today could be the reason that that's happening to you. Welcome back to the She Runs Strong podcast, powered by Coach Parry with myself, Nicky Freedman, and Shona Hendricks. Hello. What
Hi.
are we talking about today, Shona?
Nicky, super interesting topic, and I really hope that this hits home with a lot of females. Essentially, we're talking about low energy availability, right? And of course, there's many nuances to this. There's a spectrum of how this works in life and in running and in exercise and sport medicine. But essentially, low energy availability means not consuming enough calories to match your energy demands of the body, right? So as you're sitting there listening to this podcast, or of course, if you're running and listening to this podcast, of course, you're utilizing fuel. But if you're just sitting down doing nothing, you're utilizing fuel. Your body is using fuel to function, right? And so we need to make sure that we're taking in enough energy to match the demands of what the body is putting out. And generally, this is essentially low energy availability, and the concerns and the physiological changes that come with low energy availability is just a lot more prevalent with people who train, because your energy expenditure is more, right? And so when we're looking at energy expenditure, we're talking about it's our basal metabolic rate. So you just sitting there, what your body is utilizing to function, your brain and everything to function, plus your active energy expenditure. So that would be your training, and plus the thermic effect of food, right? So that is how much energy your body uses to digest food. That would give you your total daily expenditure. And when we don't match that with what we're putting in, a lot goes wrong in the body. The body is made to survive, and so it finds other ways to function, and it then takes from other places. And so let me just make this clear there as well, is that, this is very, very common in females and very common in female runners, which is why we're speaking about it. But it's not only relevant to females, and it stems from, in the science, and maybe let's tap there very quickly. It used to be called the female athlete triad. So it was linked to amenorrhea, so losing your period, to low bone density, and some sort of disordered eating, right? And so that was the concept. But over time, we realized that this also is applicable to men. And so they changed that to now essentially term what we call RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency in sports. But that is a spectrum, and it moves along. And we're going to get into a lot of that as we sort of go through the chat today. But let me just say this, that I think, sorry, Nicky, do you want to say something?
No, that carry on. I was just
Yeah. So I think it's really, really key. And why we want to speak about it on the She Runs Strong podcast is Nicky and I see this with runners all the time, right? And so very often with female runners who are in perimenopause, they're trying to manage their weight, and so they're restricting diets, and so then they start performing badly because they're in low energy availability. And then so what do? They then try to train harder because they think they're performing badly because they're not training hard enough. And so then we start getting sick and we start getting injured, and we just go into this downward spiral. And because very often these symptoms of low energy availability, which we're going to go into in a little bit later, all the symptoms of low energy availability are very similar to menopause symptoms, right? It's the usual: fatigue, sick,
yes.
injured, just constantly tired, not getting training well. We often misdiagnose this and we just go, oh, it's menopause, right? And we just carry on. And so when in actual fact, it's misdiagnosed and it's low energy availability.
Okay. Well, this sounds a big topic, and there's quite a lot to unpack there that you've sort of covered quite quickly over. So, there was a few things there that I was kind of interested in. You sort of said that. Well, let's just start. So, this isn't an eating disorder. It's how do I know the difference between what is the difference? I mean, you're talking about low energy availability. So
Exactly, Nicky.
how
And sorry, finish. Yeah.
no, how does that differ from an eating I mean,
Definitely. So that's what, the female athlete triad in what it was described as had disordered eating in that concept. And this, eating disorders are far more nuanced than this alone. They're mental health conditions. And so we're not talking just about eating disorders. This can form part of it, of course, but it is a form of disordered eating, if I can put it that way. But essentially, yes, it's a separate concept. We're not necessarily talking about eating disorders. We're talking about
Yeah.
just not getting enough. I hate
Day
using
to
the word
day.
calories, so I don't, I
Yes.
don't want to use the word
So this
calories. I
is
might
more
use it today. Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
performance-based. So you're
Yes.
looking, it's more trying to eke out that extra bit of performance in your endurance sport.
Yes, definitely. But again, it's about just getting enough energy for what your body requires. And as runners, we are obviously putting our body through more. We need more energy, and very often we're not matching that input and output. And so this isn't just someone who's going through an eating disorder. This can, Nicky, let me say this. This can apply to anyone across the board who's running. I'm not over 45, so I'm not even saying that it's only for menopausal women. But in 2019, I was training for Amsterdam. And as I'm sure it's come up in this podcast often, I'm not a great person in the kitchen. I really don't enjoy cooking, and I'm quite lazy when it comes to that. And in my training for Amsterdam, I just was never getting better. I was training hard, I was training well, like I was doing it consistently, but I just was getting worse and worse. And I looking back, I'm convinced that I was in some form of low energy availability because I wasn't eating enough carbs. And yeah, my training just went down the drain because I wasn't getting enough fuel and energy for what my body required it to do. And so it's not just a thing of, I think we have to move away from looking at someone and going, oh, this person's this, but it can work across the board.
So
For
that's
anyone.
interesting. So for you, you felt that your performance, you weren't progressing. How else? How else can this be a problem? How else can you sort of see the signs and symptoms so that with hindsight you could see it there for yourself? What
Yeah.
else would you look out for? Why?
Yeah, I think, here's the thing is that, well, let's just go straight into the signs and symptoms. I mean, so yes, training decrements is a massive, change in performance and recovery. If you're constantly fatigued, if you're getting sick often, that is a big indication. If you've always got these niggling injuries that just don't ever go away, and of course, this is all assuming that your training is up to scratch, right? So, and if you're recovering enough, you're doing all the things right, you're sleeping, but you just can't seem to get rid of these niggles. Those are very good indications off the bat that you're in some form of low energy availability. And especially if you're looking at your training and you and your coach are sitting there and you're going, okay, we're not overtraining, we're recovering enough, we're doing some strength work, all of those things are in play, but I still keep getting sick. And very often it could be down to low energy availability. And I know, Nicky, as a coach, one of the first questions you ask your female
Yes.
clients in particular, but it should probably be, I know we've spoken about doing that across the board, is talk to me about your nutrition, right? So that's something you do quite a bit of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's so key a lot with females in actually all ages, but very much in that sort of over 40, 45 age group as well,
Mm.
because they are slightly worried about the weight gain that they've maybe couple of pounds extra through the sort of peri and menopause years, and then they've kind of come to running maybe as a wee bit of a look towards losing weight as well as performance, or perhaps they've always been a really fast runner and their times have decreased. Either way, they have then perhaps just gone out for their runs in the morning and not eaten and just eaten for the rest of the day. And often, I think we've spoken about this before, and certainly we will in the future, about fasted running. And so that's often the first thing I hone in on, just to make sure. And what I've been really shocked about is it can be the same for men as well. So, men out there, you need to look out for your eating too. But I think
Mm.
it is quite a common problem, and it becoming more so nowadays with the wee boom in running that we have
Yeah.
as well, that people are coming to it and looking for, a kind of body composition change, I suppose.
Yeah.
So, what about, let's go through some of the effects it can have, and how we can sort of see things manifest. I mean, we've got kind of short-term and medium-term effects. So let's go through initially how short is short-term and what can the effects be short-term wise with this?
Yeah, perfect. Let's do that. So first up, the short-term effects can be anything, you can start feeling those negative effects within 4 to 5 days, guys. So this is really short term. So if you have a time where you are not fueling properly for a week, and yeah, things are stressful, life is stressful, things are happening, and you're not getting in enough fuel, it could be that quick that this happens, right? And so very often, as I mentioned, that starts with performance decrements, illness, injury. But some of the effects, and this is very applicable to runners, is one, low skeletal muscle glycogen, right? And that's the fuel. So we're getting less muscle glycogen after not getting enough of these calories in or energy in. There's obvious effects on your performance and your recovery. You're always feeling tired, and as a menopausal woman, that is even worse. Increased fatigue, reduced bone formation, guys. Within 4 to 5 days, reduced bone formation. I mean, that's very scary, considering that is already a concern. Increased inflammation, lower iron absorption. And so essentially, before this becomes a health crisis for the body is almost turning down the thermostats. It's essentially preparing itself for extended periods of a resource limitation. So if you essentially think of, if we were living out in in evolutionary times and the body wasn't getting enough energy, it would start turning things down a little bit to make sure that that it could survive in the long term.
That's so that definitely rings the alarm bells, doesn't it? For me, I'm thinking stress reactions and stress fractures. That's all kind of on the way to looking at those. Low iron is not getting your oxygen around fast enough in your body, so performance is going to be affected, obviously, if you get a stress fracture. So actually those are just underlying kind of grumbling away in your
exactly.
system.
Short term, Nicky, as well. Yeah.
Yes. So
Yeah.
medium term effects, what would they look like?
Yeah. So excuse me. So medium term effects. Now we're looking, if you are in low energy availability for a couple of weeks to months, okay, so you just keep trucking on, you keep powering through the fatigue, you keep powering through the injury niggles. And this is really what you and I see a lot with our one-on-one clients as well.
Yes.
And so, it just seems more that this becomes where it's more than just a bad training session. And to be honest, from a scientific perspective, we don't actually know the exact effects because we can't study it, right? There's no ethical approval where we take someone and we put them in low energy availability. So this is just what we see in case reports from people that are working in the field. So reduced strength and power in this area, increased injury rates, poor training adaptations, again, increased inflammation, and negative effects on immunity. And so this is really, if we're thinking back to that evolutionary response where the body is now in a state of stress and it needs to start taking from other areas to fulfill the needs because it's not getting it from the energy sources, which is why there's an increase in illness. So it turns your immune system off, but it takes the energy away from that to then fulfill it to make you survive. And so that's where we really start getting into the stress fractures that you're mentioning and so on. That's where we're starting to get into quite severe low energy availability. And then let me just jump into the long-term effects, which is really when the body then starts to switch off function that it doesn't need. So in particular with for females, one of the first physiological systems that will be turned off is the reproductive system, which is why females who are really training in a high load and in very low energy availability will no longer get their period or their menstrual cycle. And in the past, that used to be almost condoned as a badge of honor. I was training so hard, I lost my period. But no, it's not a good thing. It just means that your body is not getting enough energy. And so that's essentially all the medium and short term and long term effects. And so this is very detrimental. This isn't just a matter of saying, hey guys, make sure you have a bagel before you run. This is very serious, not only to your running performance but also to your health.
Yeah. And it comes over so slow. It's a slow creep over time that you don't almost realize it's happening. I know from the athletes I've dealt with is you can sort of, like you say, you can't study this thing, but they've come off a back of quite a few stress fractures. And just as a coach, being familiar in that environment, that's the first thing that you kind of look at is, how are you feeling? How are you eating? What are you eating? And you go back, and it's always quite surprising just how little they're getting away with to eat on the amount of training that they're doing, often marathon runners and ultra runners, and you're just like, "Are you not feeling tired?" But I think it's become the norm for them. They've become so used to it that they don't realize. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, how do they know if they're eating? And I mean, that's the thing. They haven't realized they're not eating enough, but how do they know if they're eating? How would they know to eat enough?
I
How do
mean, if you want to recover from sessions faster, not feel tired all the time, run pain and injury free, and improve your endurance, then be sure to join me in my upcoming training specifically for female runners over the age of 45. In it, I'll share with you my simple 5-step framework that'll transform your running. Simply scan the QR code on screen now or click on the link in the description to save your seats in the training now. We look forward to seeing you there. Yeah, it's a good question, Nicky, because if you think that that's the norm, how do you answer that? I think a key thing, again, if you are in perimenopause or menopause and you've landed up with a fracture or a bone stress injury, again, we put that down to menopause, right? We often go, well, my bone mineral density is lower in menopause, but I think then always ask yourself, well, am I eating enough? And so educate yourself on what is required in terms of daily calorie intake and fueling for your running, and then try work that out for yourself if you are getting enough. Because very often, I mean, I speak to clients all the time or runners all the time who will go, no, I am eating enough, I have a banana during my long run, and my hour,
Yes.
and it's just, so yeah, I think you have to find out what is required. So generally athletes or people who train require anywhere between 2,500 to 4,000 kilocalories a day. Okay, so that's a lot, right? And I think if you just did the basic exercise to see how many calories you take in a day, let's not even look at how much you're exercising to make sure that you're getting in enough calories over, before you even consider your training. I think some females will be shocked as to how little they are getting in. And there's apps you can use, Nicky, to analyze. And I mean, I'm not a big fan of counting calories. That's not what I'm suggesting. But just to get a gauge. But ideally, go and see a dietitian and really get a good idea of your intake versus your outputs. I think
that's very important, isn't it? Because I know some of these ladies, they've been eating a certain way for such a long time that it's the internal dialogue is like, well, I've been running and I've been going to my work, and it's been okay, I have a stress fracture, but that's sorted now and that's fine. But it's kind of, as you said earlier, it's your body takes what it needs from other parts, the muscles and the bones, so it's going to get what it needs and it's going to weaken your bones. So that just kind of getting that help via a coach or a dietitian is going to be a good, and constantly I find with myself, with these ladies, is often just continually speaking about it in the coaching calls that we're chatting about. And in not necessarily, I mean, it's about calories ish, but it's also about timing and fueling and stuff. And what's your thoughts on that as well? I mean, I know that we're going to go into an episode soon coming up about fasting. I can't remember the date. Was it the 20? It's coming out.
I think it's in about two weeks time.
Yeah. But what's your take on that then? So, because I think a lot of the women just don't eat in the morning because they want to narrow their gap of calories, and but actually if they spanned across the day, they could increase that. What do you think with that?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a key thing. I mean, if we're speaking intermittent fasting particularly, you are exactly that. You're narrowing the window in which you can get in all of the energy you require in the day, which is why sometimes intermittent fasting works as a weight management method for some people. I don't necessarily recommend it for runners, or female runners, but it works because it's calories in, calories out. So you're minimizing how many calories in you're getting versus how much your body expends. And so, yes, I think you're narrowing that window. So you're already putting yourself at a bit of a deficit because you've got less time in order to get enough calories in for the day. And then if you're training on top of that, I think that's quite a, you're putting yourself at a more risk then. And so if we could time our fueling to be in and around, and Nicky, I know you're a massive advocate of this, to ensure that we 100% fueling our activity and our exercise and our running and our training, you're less likely to find yourself in this overall low energy availability because you're fueling that exercise that is required. Of course, you still need to look at what's been done over a day period. But yes, I think trying to fuel your training. So make sure you're getting something in beforehand. Make sure you're taking something in during if it's a longer session. And of course, that post-training recovery meal is just as important in all of this. I know you're a big advocate for that with your athletes, and you've worked with a few athletes who have found themselves in low energy availability.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's getting that before you go out running in the morning, I think, is always tricky for people anyway, because just the limit, just wanting to maximize your sleep in this day and age of busy lives. So there is practicalities there as well. Most people don't want to have to get up an hour or an hour and a half earlier to have a breakfast, to then go out for their run, to then get ready for work and all this sort of stuff. So there is a practicality, and that can be why calories, the window, like we were saying, is a bit lower. But you are spending so much time in your run training and your focus program of consistent running week in and week out. It's the same with your nutrition. It needs that consistency too. And you can't neglect it, which is what a lot of people, I mean, this almost to me sounds just like a little bit of a neglect of your nutrition, really, which we just don't want. We want to be complementing your running training at the same time. So I think just whether you run in the evening or the morning, it's just like focusing your nutrition around that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're doing a big ultra pretty soon. How have you found focusing your nutrition, and do you prioritize that with your running? I mean, how does that all work for you?
I mean, I do, because I know about it. In practicality terms, I definitely can be better. And so focusing on getting something in before my runs is important. Like you say, I'm the sort of person who gets up 20 minutes before my run, puts my shoes on, brush my teeth, and used to head out the door. So we've spoken quite a bit on this podcast around taking in even just fruit juice, so you're getting something in. And then obviously that post-run nutrition becomes even more important, especially if you're not fueling before. So you're not just depleting all the time. And then I think, just trying to snack in the day. Good snacks. I'm not saying, packet of crisps. I mean, like good snacks, like something protein orientated. And then before, if I do an afternoon session, and particularly if I'm doing an interval session in the afternoons, then making sure that I have a snack, and I normally take a sports drink with that session as well. And I think a key thing, Nicky, just talking about this time, which has been quite a focused, 8 to 10 weeks of training for me. I have become more honed in on the nutrition, and maybe that's something that athletes need to do as well, or female runners need to do as well. It makes sense, when you're increasing your mileage, we need to increase our intake, and so look at your training plans, and when it is going into times of increased mileage, and in particular for a marathon or an ultra, speak to a dietitian or your coach, and just make sure that you are managing that, because as I say, this, the short-term effects of which, the low iron and low glycogen stores, which is going to affect your training, can happen within 4 days. And, there's even studies now that are coming out, because RED-S, which is what I spoke about earlier, is on a spectrum, and low energy availability is in the beginning of that spectrum. But studies are coming out to say that it's not even just about not getting in enough calories during the day. If you're not getting in enough carbohydrates, even if you're eating good foods, good proteins, good fats, but you're not getting enough carbs, you are going to start feeling these effects. And I think as females, particularly, our age groups of females, we've been brought up to believe that carbs are the devil, and they're really not. And I really wish that we can start understand, or start just changing our mindsets around that. I think as females, of course, Nicky said it to me earlier, Nicky, as females, there is a vanity aspect of aesthetically wanting to maintain our weight and so on. But now we really need to start considering and focusing on our training and doing what's right for our health firstly, and then secondly,
So
our training
balance.
as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I have something. So a question I always find kind of confusing. When I'm training for a marathon or ultra, and often train 4 or 5 days a week, plus maybe a couple of strength days as well. But when you're doing the big long runs, or maybe the 90-minute runs, or the 2-hour, 3-hour runs, that puts you in, that uses up a lot of calories. But then how do you replenish that across? Do you do that across the week or by the day? Did I mean that?
I
So
think so.
yes.
Go.
So it's kind of, so some days you maybe have a rest day, so your calories are
Yeah,
1,800
I
to
hear you.
2,000, or some days you maybe do a 3-hour run and your need to replenish is back. Do you kind of keep consistent across the week, or do you add on some?
Yeah,
What's
I'm
your
with you.
thoughts on that?
I understand your question now. So yes, I think that's a great question. The body requires a general energy input every day. So let's say you're having a rest day, your body will still require energy to function, right? Your brain, your organs, everything. So there needs to be a baseline amount daily. And then that's where you and I have spoken in and around fueling for your session. So if you then fuel before your run, during long runs, and after your run, you're then getting that extra over and above your baseline, which will then be, managing the exercise portion. I mean, Nicky, I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but I ran that marathon recently, and the day after of the marathon, I was a bit like, yeah, I had my Steri Stumpy, my chocolate milk, and we were off for the weekend, so I did end up having a really nice dinner and 1 or 2 glasses of wine. But then the next day, I was ravenous, like I could
Right.
eat anything in sight, and very often, that's also the case, is that the energy that was used the day before, the body's still making up for that.
Yeah.
And so I think we would be remiss to sort of go, okay, well, it's a rest day. I'm now going to restrict myself, and then tomorrow's a hard day. So I would recommend baseline to ensure that we're matching our energy expenditure that's going out. So that's your basal metabolic rate, and then on training days, make sure that we are just upping that. And a nice way to do that is in and around your training, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So a bit more breakfast on those days.
Definitely,
Bit
but
extra.
more breakfast. Obviously, your post training recovery, and then your breakfast, and then a couple of snacks in between, because for sure females are not getting in enough protein. I mean, we've jokes about this often in terms of all the craze around protein at the moment, but yeah, I think not to put one thing more important than the other, but as female endurance runners, carbohydrates is really, really that's what fuels us. That's what gets us going. And I'm not saying that's more important than protein, but if you are restricting your carbohydrates, I really recommend that you have a look at this with a coach or a dietitian to make sure that you are getting in enough fuel for what you're asking your body to do. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's quite a topic, that one, and one definitely that just needs to be looked at. Really good information there, Shona. Ton of information and value in all of that. Really, really interesting. If you have any last takeaways, or what would you add? Would you add anything? I mean, you've covered a lot
Sure.
there.
I mean, it's a lot, and again, that like I say, we're doing that intermittent fasting episode in a week or two, and there's a lot that we can discuss on this. I think the focus of this episode was just because, guys, we can go even deeper into this, but just to bring awareness. I think that was the focus for me of this episode, is that very often this is the last thing that females think about. We're like, okay, well, my training's bad, I'm getting sick and I'm getting injured, but no one ever looks at how much nutrition they're taking in. And so, if you're concerned, speak to a coach, speak to a dietitian. Yeah, for me, the big thing was about awareness with this. And
Yes.
the last thing I saw it on Instagram this week, and I just thought I'd mention it, which I thought was quite cool, is that athletes don't diet and exercise, they fuel and train, which I think, again, just that changing
I
of
love
mindset.
that.
Yeah. So,
Fuel
that's
and train. Love
fuel
that.
and train, don't diet and exercise, because we all grew up in the culture where exercise and dieting was the skinny is better, and we now know that strong is the new skinny as well. So I just wanted to bring awareness to this topic, Nicky. But
Love that. That's great. I love that. Great takeaway there. Fuel and train, folks.
Brilliant.
Good.
Good. Thank you guys, for this episode, and hope it has clicked for a little bit. Nikki, thank you for your time and expertise as well. And
yours.
guys, if this is something that you struggle with, please pop it in the comments. Let us know what works for you. If you're managing with low energy availability, or if this has hit home for you, I think that would also be good to hear from you guys. So pop those into the comment section if you're watching this on YouTube. And keep those questions coming. But look out for that intermittent fasting episode, Nikki, but I'll see you again next week.
Cool. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.